All right, everybody, it's Mehran here, back for another edition of Instagram Live Q&A. We got a lot to cover today, so we're going to dive right in. So a couple things. Obviously, with the July LSAT results out, we're going to talk about how to proceed from there. Also, with the September exam, less than a month away, we'll talk a little bit about how to make the most of the stretch run here. Obviously, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to drop them into the chat. We will get to those as soon as we go over, some of these things that we want to talk about in terms of logistics and things that we just want to highlight. Obviously, if you've missed any of the previous Instagram Live Q&As, they all are available on YouTube for replay. Our YouTube account is LSATMax, so definitely check those out. A lot of great content there. And completely free of charge, so make sure you take advantage of it. As always, before we get started here, if you have any questions, concerns, if we can help any way, right, text LSAT to 310-818-7743, and we can set up a free consult to chat about anything that's giving you trouble. And obviously, if you are preparing for the September LSAT, that is a great place to start if you are concerned about anything. So off the bat here, a couple of things that we definitely want to emphasize logistically. Tonight at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time is the deadline to request a refund for the September LSAT. So for those of you out there who either are happy with your July LSAT score, hopefully your score left you feeling like Pablo. But obviously if it didn't, we'll talk about that as well. But if you are happy and you are no longer going to take the September LSAT, make sure to request your refund tonight before 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time, because that is the deadline. And also, I think it's important to think about it. If you were planning to take it and you aren't feeling prepared, there's absolutely nothing wrong with postponing your exam to October or November. Again, what matters more than the rolling admissions is having the LSAT score that you're going to need to gain admission to the law school of your dreams. So really focus your attention on getting your score into the range that you're going to need for the schools that you're interested in. And again, that's going to come back to the 25 to 75 LSAT range. So if you're not sure, look that up for the schools that you're interested in. Worst case scenario, you want to be within that range. Best case scenario, we can be above the 75th percentile range there. Now, another thing to keep in mind as you consider whether or not to take the September LSAT is that the LSAC's new retake policy is going live as of September. And what that means is you can only take the LSAT 3 times a year. And so that's something to definitely be aware of as you consider whether to stick with the September LSAT or not. 3 times a year, 5 times, I want to say it was every 2 years, and then 7 times in your life. And then obviously, if you score 180, you can never take it again. Again, still not sure why anybody would want to do that. But those are the new policies, and they will be going live as of September. All previous administrations have no bearing on the new retake policy. So if you're worried about, you've taken it previously twice, taking the September LSAT is going to be counted as the first time. So don't worry about that as you consider whether to cancel and request a refund. But again, the deadline is tonight at 11:59 Eastern Time. Another thing to definitely keep in mind here as you move forward is the LSATs are filling up quickly in terms of locations. I've heard about wait lists already taking place. So if you're taking October, if you're taking November, if you're taking January and you have not registered, right? Again, assuming that the registration is open for your exam, make sure you register right away. There seems to be some availability issues with the digital LSAT that obviously LSAC's working on. So definitely take advantage of the benefits that come from registering right away and the locations still being wide open. All right. That's it in terms of logistical questions. Now, I did see one here from Samira in terms of the attempts before September not show up on your record. No, they're definitely going to show up on your record. It's just your attempts for before the September LSAT won't count in terms of the new retake policy that LSAC is announcing. So something to be aware of. The scores will definitely appear, and we're going to talk about that right now as we turn our attention to the July exam and the scores that were released. And as I enjoy this amazing beverage, thank you, Sarah, for sending these. One of our amazing LSAT students sent cases of sparkling water to our office. Apparently, she's been watching these IG lives and she knows how much I enjoy sparkling water. So again, thank you, Sarah, for that. We really appreciate it. Now, let's dive right into the July LSAT results. Obviously, the results came out a week early. You have, I believe, again, it's until September 4th to keep or cancel your score. So a lot of students here are wondering whether they should keep it, whether they should cancel it. So let's talk about that first. The LSAT no longer, or law schools no longer average LSAT scores. So if you didn't do as well as you would have liked, but it's not a terrible score, there's nothing wrong with keeping it. Now, obviously every law school will see these scores. So, ideally, not having low scores is better. But if your score is decent, like a couple of people reached out, told us that they scored 163, 165. They're trying to break 170. Should I keep? Should I cancel? It's a tough question to answer because, I don't think it's going to be detrimental to you if you have that score on your record, particularly because I think law schools are going to be aware of the additional variable that was present on the July exam, which was, obviously 50-50 digital LSAT versus paper pencil. So, if you're on the fence and the score is something that you would be okay with, I would recommend maybe not canceling it. But obviously if it's nowhere near what you're hoping to score, there's nothing wrong with canceling it, particularly because canceling it gives you an additional LSAT, free of charge within a year of, that decision, right? So, that is something to definitely keep in mind. Now, obviously, as you look forward now, if you took July and you're registered for September or you're going to be taking October, November, right? I think the key is getting ourselves in a position to achieve our target score on our next attempt, right? And something I just want to emphasize, because I know, generally speaking, whenever an LSAT rolls around, students can get discouraged, particularly when the scores are released. But I think my personal story here of my first attempt will really make you feel a lot better. I think having nerves on the LSAT when you go live for the first time is completely natural. It happened to me. The nerves got the best of me. I made a mistake on logic games. Thankfully, I caught it. But I knew that if I wasn't able to score perfect on games, my hopes of breaking 170 were slim to none. And so I ended up canceling my score. And the reason I did that was back in my day, again, because I'm a dinosaur, law schools used to average LSAT scores. So if you took it, had a low score, and you weren't able, and you kept it, you would have to do even better the next time around to get your average into the 25-75 range of the schools that you're interested in. Obviously, if those schools are looking for a 170, you can imagine how difficult that would have made the process for me. But thankfully, in today's world, they don't average. But again, even myself, nerves got the best of me. I made a mistake. I ended up canceling. So if you had an experience like that, again, particularly given the fact that July was unique in regards to the added variable of not knowing whether your exam was going to be digital or paper pencil, I think it's completely okay if you didn't do as well as you would have liked. And the beauty of taking the July exam is you took it early. Now we have more options in front of us. We have September, October, November. And in terms of if you're applying for law school this fall for the class starting in the fall of 2020, any of these will be more than sufficient in terms of getting your application in and having it considered for the class entering 2020. Obviously, the sooner the better because of the rolling admissions process. But what's more important is getting your score to where it needs to be for you to have a realistic chance of getting admission to the schools that you're interested in. So now that we've chatted a little bit about the July exam, let's look forward to September, because those of you who are taking the September LSAT, we have less than 1 month remaining. I want to say it's 29 days, or maybe that was yesterday. I should log into LSATMax and see what the countdown says. But generally, we're definitely less than a month away. So what should we be doing down the stretch here to make sure that we're putting ourselves in the best position to score as high as possible on the September LSAT? A couple of things that I think are important. First, obviously, we're going to be practicing under time pressure. We need to do simulated LSATs. We need to get comfortable with the digital format, because as we know, in North America, Canada, and in the US, as of September, every LSAT is now going to be the digital LSAT administered on a Microsoft Surface tablet. And so as you prepare down the stretch here, I think it's really important to simulate the digital LSAT experience. And again, if you are trying to figure out how to do that, remember, we have released a new app, Practice LSATs by LSATMax, that is just a digital LSAT simulator. If you download this app, you get the June 2007 LSAT free of charge, as you see here at the top of the screen, colored in, and you can take that. And again, if you want to see what our digital LSAT simulator looks like, there you have it, right? And you notice it has all of the UI elements of the new digital LSAT, timer in the top right, highlighting, underlining, the questions at the bottom, the ability to flag, the ability to eliminate answer choices, and obviously the touch technology will allow you to jump back and forth between these questions, which is obviously going to be great if you are at the end of the section and you're hoping to go back and take a look at some of these other questions that you might not have been 100% sure on. Something to be aware of that we just released because students were asking us, you can now, in addition to buying the exams a la carte, you can now buy digital LSAT bundles. And you see that here. So again, if you're interested in that, please feel free to reach out. This will allow you to buy a bundle of practice LSATs that you can use obviously down the stretch. One question that we have been getting that I did want to discuss is how to simulate the 5-section experience with our digital LSAT simulator, because as those of you who know, when LSAT releases prep tests, they're only going to be releasing the 4 scored sections, right? They don't release, they're not going to release the experimental section. That's obviously what makes it experimental. So how to simulate the 5-section digital LSAT? And the way to do that is, for your first section, what I would do is take a section from another digital LSAT, right? So you start off, your first section is experimental, again, but remember, this section is actually from another LSAT, so for our purposes, it's a great example of how you're doing still. But start off with a section from a different LSAT as your first section, then launch your full exam for the prep test, which will be the 4 additional sections. And what happens is after the first 2 sections, you'll have the 15-minute break, right? Just like the real LSAT. And then after that, you'll be able to take the last 2 sections, and that way you'll experience the 5-section experience, because you definitely want to make sure that you are preparing for the 5-section experience, because taking 4 sections is not the same as taking 5 sections. So definitely, make sure that you do that. Johnny, I appreciate that you like the shirt. Again, I'm hoping everyone out there was feeling like Pablo after they got their July 2019 LSAT scores. But again, if you didn't, don't worry. I promise you, if you work hard, you'll get there. And again, there's nothing wrong with having to retake it. As we have already discussed, yours truly had that same experience. So some other things to think about, because okay, so as you head down the stretch here, what should be the frequency of practice LSATs? Because the one thing you definitely want to be aware of is you don't want to burn yourself out mentally before the September LSAT. And taking a lot of 5-section simulated LSATs is a great way to do that. We have students sometimes reach out to us and they say, hey, I'm going to take a full-length LSAT every day until my exam. And I think that is probably the worst idea I've ever heard of, because by the time your exam rolls around, your brain is going to be mashed potatoes and you will not be in a position to do as well as possible. So how can we balance the need to practice under time pressure, the need to take simulated LSATs, and the important factor of not burning yourself out before exam day? And the best way to do that is as follows. What I would suggest doing is 1 full-length 5-section simulated LSAT per week, okay? Ideally at the exact time of your real LSAT, right? In the September LSAT, if you're not a Sabbath observer, Shabbat Shalom, by the way, if you're not a Sabbath observer, it's going to be on Saturday, and so you want to use that time for your digital digital practice LSAT simulation, right? Now, the rest of the week, in order to continue to practice under time pressure, but not experience the mental fatigue that comes with the 5-section experience, what you want to do is just take individual sections under time pressure. And let me give you an example. The released prep tests are 4 sections. If I took 2 sections in the morning, right, which would be 70 minutes, took a break for a couple hours, came back, took 2 sessions, the next 2 sections in the evening, I'm still getting through a full prep test every day, but not with the same mental fatigue that accompanies the 5-section in a row simulated LSAT gauntlet. Now, in terms of the writing sample, right, we're going to completely disregard that in terms of our digital LSAT simulations, because remember, the writing sample is now completely separate. You're going to log in online within a year after taking your LSAT and do that under the time pressure from your computer. So you don't need to worry about adding that to your digital LSAT experience. All you want to do is focus on the 5-section experience. Now, another thing that I think is important to highlight is, obviously, if you feel comfortable with your strategies, all you're going to be doing is simulated digital LSATs, right? The timing is obviously what we want to get comfortable with. And I think it's important to spend the time to review your work as well. Don't forget that. A lot of students think, I just want to do questions. But if you're not really spending the time to review your work, how can you expect to see improvement from that, right? So, I think it's important to spend the time to review your work, and try to get a sense of the mistakes that we're making. Because obviously the tendency of the time pressure to cause you to break from strategies that are going to ultimately make you successful is very common. I experienced it myself when I was preparing, and I talk about that. If you want to hear me talk about that, particularly for the logical reasoning, you can go on YouTube and search struggling with logical reasoning, and you'll find a video of me talking. I didn't have the beard. It was a long time ago, but it is me, I promise. And I go over what I was doing wrong and the minor tweak that I made that really resulted in me being able to take my score to the next level. I was stuck in the mid 160s at that point. And with this subtle adjustment, I was able to get my score into the 170s and never look back. So, that being said, as you review your exams, if you start to notice any kind of trends, any kinds of question types that you're missing, right? Consistently, we definitely want to spend time to review those, right? We want to go back and review these concepts, question types, to make sure that there's nothing that's giving us trouble as we move forward. Now, if you're looking for strategy help and you aren't an LSATMax student, please be aware that you can subscribe to LSATMax monthly and unlock our entire course for $199 a month, pay as you go, right? So if you think about that, that is going to be between now and the September exam is 1 month, right? So it's $199, and it will unlock every single strategy video for every question type, whether it's strengthen, weaken, methods of reasoning, errors of reasonings, hybrid games, group games. Every lesson is going to be unlocked with proven strategies that we know will raise your score, because it's not only the strategies that I personally use to go from the 140s to the 174, but also all of our students that have been able to improve their score have been using as well. So definitely take a look at that if you're struggling with strategies. In terms of the video that I mentioned, it's called Struggling with Logical Reasoning. And just to give you a brief summary, the idea was, because of the time pressure, I had convinced myself that I have to get through the stimulus as quickly as possible and get to the question stem and answer choices because of the time pressure. But what was happening was that this was a counterproductive strategy for me, because I didn't understand the stimulus when I was rushing through it. And so by taking a step back and pausing, again, particularly in the case of arguments, because that's really where you want to make sure that you understand the argument, because remember what they're testing, right? They're testing your ability to encounter flawed arguments and be able to point that out, whether that means strengthen, weaken, find the same flaw, point out the flaw in abstract terms, right? These are all coming off the same idea of critical thought and being able to encounter flawed arguments and point that out. And so by just making a minor tweak, was pausing, really spending a little bit more time on the stimulus, right? And sure, that made me get to the question stem and answer choices later, but when I got there, I knew what I was doing. I understood the argument. I was able to quickly eliminate incorrect answer choices. And when I got it down to those two, which if you're studying for the LSAT, I'm sure you know what it feels like to get it down to those two and constantly make the wrong choice, I was able to finally get over that hump and start to see how the LSAT actually works. So just another example of the importance of working under time pressure and understanding what you want to be doing to keep yourself successful as you do that. Great. And so I think that's a good overview of that stuff here. Now, as we turn over to some of the questions that we received, and obviously the questions that we're getting here in the chat, I apologize real quick. Let me open this up so I can see those. Couple of things again that I want to emphasize in terms of our resources that we have available. That we've briefly mentioned already, but let's definitely go back over it. If you are looking for digital LSATs, remember our app is available on iOS and Android. So if you have a tablet, you won't find a better place to simulate digital LSATs. Again, it comes with a free LSAT, and we did recently release the digital LSAT bundles that you can take advantage of. So definitely do that. Remember, LSAT makes 3 available for free as well, which are 71, 73, and 74. So definitely take advantage of those. We talked about LSATMax Monthly. Again, if you're struggling with strategy, please take advantage of that. I promise you, our strategies are proven and they will make a difference. And there is still plenty of time to prepare for the September LSAT and improve your score. So if you find yourself struggling and you're using some other materials out there that aren't working, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing but expecting different results, right? So let's make a change and let's see if we can make a difference. And again, in addition to that, don't forget about the free consult that we've already discussed. We're happy to chat with you to see how we can help. Again, all you need to do is text LSAT to 310-818-7743, and one of our LSAT advisors will help you navigate this process and put yourself in the best position to be successful. Lastly, if you are looking for serious one-on-one attention, we have officially announced our private tutoring. All of our tutors, 99th percentile instructors, including a couple that actually scored perfect scores. So if you want private tutoring, we also have that available. So please feel free to take advantage of that. The beauty of our private tutoring, just like our course, it's available anywhere in the world. So it doesn't matter where you are. We will be able to help you. We do the sessions via web conference, so we will be able to share visual things as well. So definitely take advantage of that if you find yourself struggling. All right. So let's dive into some of the questions. One of the questions we received that I think is helpful, particularly as we talk about digital LSATs, it's what order should you go through the prep tests, right? And I'm of the opinion that you definitely want to save the newer ones for down the stretch. So obviously if you're taking September, you don't have a lot of time. I think it's only a few weekends, right? So it's really only 3 full-length digital LSATs that you're going to be taking. And I would recommend taking the newer ones, right? Because the newer ones, in terms of the exam being slightly different, I think is important to focus on the newer ones because you will see, frequency of question types changing over the years. As we talked about in our Instagram Live Q&A on logic games, there's that new logic game question that appears at the end of the game, which is if you suspend a condition and add a condition, right? So you definitely want to get used to that. So our recommendation is to start from the older exams as you are understanding what you're doing. So if you're thinking about, taking, October, November, and you're just getting started, definitely do your practice on the older exams. Keep the newer exams fresh so we can use those after we understand what we're doing, right? And that's really how the LSATMax course is set up as well. The homework assignments, we're pulling the questions from the older LSATs in an effort to keep the newer exams fresh for that second part of the process. Tracy, if you've already paid for the full course, is a way to get a discount on tutors? Yes, absolutely. Our paid students do get discounts, so please reach out to us. We're happy to help any way we can there. Some other questions that we received that I definitely want to go over. One of them is a logistic question about the how quickly LSAC is going to be able to return scores now that it's a digital LSAT. A lot of students are confused about why it's not instant like the GRE or GMAT. Although you should notice, right, the LSAT, their anticipated release date for the July scores was August 28th, but they were able to release them a week early on August 21st. And as we move forward, I would assume that will continue to be the case, right? The turnaround time for your scores will be reduced, but they won't be releasing them instantly. And the reason for that is if you've done if you've done some prep tests, I'm sure you've encountered those prep tests that have questions that have been removed from scoring, right? And so despite the exam being digital, the LSAC is still not going to release the scores immediately, because what the LSAT does, which I think is great, is they monitor their questions, right? Obviously, LSAT questions go through rigorous testing, right? That's one of the reasons we have the experimental section. Well, actually, that is the reason we have the experimental section. But even with that, if LSAT notices that a question seems off in terms of how students performed on it, they do remove them from scoring, right? And I think that is why you still won't see instant turnaround times from the digital LSAT, but obviously not having Scantrons will allow LSAC to return those scores to you in a more timely manner. So that is definitely something to keep in mind, right? All right. So that being said, let's see what other questions we have here. All right. So I haven't taken the LSAT yet. Registered for September. Don't feel comfortable. Should I do it another date, or still take it and maybe cancel if I don't feel good? So I think it really matters about, how close you are. And I think that's really the importance of taking simulated exams as you progress with your prep. Because for me, I think it's the best way to know how you're doing is taking simulated practice exams under time pressure, because that's a realistic gauge of what you could expect to score if you took the LSAT for real. Now, if you're doing that and your score is nowhere near where you're hoping it to be, I don't think there's any benefit in taking it, particularly now that LSAC is releasing the limitations in terms of the number of times you can take it. So my recommendation would be, if you're signed up for September and in your recent, simulated exams, you're nowhere near your target score, I would cancel. I would request a refund. Again, the deadline is tonight, 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. And I will look forward to October or November. But again, please make sure you register as soon as possible, because locations have already filled up. There are wait lists already. So definitely make sure that you do it so you don't get stuck on a wait list and not be able to take the LSAT. So please make sure you do that. And I know that the registration deadline for October, I want to say September 10th, right? But what are we waiting for? Sign up today, right? And if you're taking November, I'm not sure if it's open yet, but if it is, register now. If it hasn't opened, wait for the day it opens and make sure you register on the first day so that you do get your choice in terms of testing locations and centers. And again, I do think that's something else to think about as you consider, registering for the exam, is testing locations, right? I'm a big fan of, universities over, the hotels, just because universities are more educational based, right? You don't need to worry about a family visiting Disneyland in the lobby making a ton of noise. So definitely, do your research on the locations. The other issue that really would be a problem is the desk size. So if you can become aware of the size of desk that they're giving you, because if you can imagine, some of those desks, which are smaller, might become problematic for you in terms of, juggling the LSAT and your scratch paper, which again is something else that we got some questions about that we should also chat about. So just like basically every session that we've done, we keep getting questions about, the digital LSAT and particularly the logic games. And it's something that we have highlighted a number of times already. Again, you can access our previous IG Live Q&As on the digital LSAT. The replays are on YouTube. But the idea is that I feel the logic games is the most problematic in terms of the new digital LSAT experience, particularly for students who have been preparing. So if you were preparing, assuming it was going to be a paper pencil exam, and now this transition has occurred, you're going to be now managing two mediums, right? You're going to be doing your work on a piece of paper, on scratch paper, and you're going to be answering the questions on the tablet now. And as we've stressed numerous times, the LSAC rewards students on the logic games who can take advantage of previous work. And so what that means is you want to make sure that your work is organized, your setup is organized, every question, every answer choice is nicely and neatly organized, particularly if you're drawing hypotheticals, right? Because you want to be able to rely on those hypotheticals as you move forward. How do you rely on hypotheticals as you move forward? Well, if a question comes out and asks you what must be true means it's always the case. So if you can find one counterexample in any of your previous work, we can delete that as an answer choice, right? Same idea in terms of could be true questions, cannot be true questions, right? If a question asks you what could be true, all we're looking for is an example that shows that it's possible. If you find an example that shows that the answer choice is possible, that means it could be true, and that would be the correct answer. Circle it and move on. Oh, I apologize. Not circle it. Tap it and move on. And then obviously in terms of cannot be true, right? Same idea. We're looking for something that's not possible, right? So if I can show that an answer choice is possible in my previous work, obviously I would be able to eliminate that as an answer choice. Definitely things to think about here as you progress. Let's see. Okay. If I attend college at the location of the LSAT, would it help for me to go and practice where the LSAT is given? Absolutely. I think that's the best idea. Again, when you take your simulated LSATs, the closer you can be to taking to the exact experience that you're going to have, the better. And obviously, if the location is accessible to you and you can go and sit there or sit in a classroom that's similar, absolutely. I would highly recommend doing that. I would also highly recommend, going to your testing location before your exam day, assuming that it's within a reasonable distance, because, in terms of, if it's not something that you're comfortable with or used to, you definitely don't want to, try that on the day of the exam, particularly with the September LSAT being in the morning, right? You want to be on time, right? And you want to make sure that you know how to get there, because the last thing you want to do is get stuck in traffic or have something come up that stresses you out before you even start the LSAT, right? That is not the way to approach it. Another thing that I think is helpful to think about that I did on my LSATs that I found extremely helpful is I found it useful to not have the first question that I saw be a real LSAT question, right? I wanted to get my mind in the mode of LSAT without it being the real LSAT. So what I did was I took a handful of toss-up logical reasoning questions. I mean, like the easiest ones I could find, right? And I brought them with me, and I actually did them in the parking lot before I walked in. The reason I say toss-ups is, listen, we don't want to encounter a question when we're doing this that's going to freak us out, right? We want to stay calm. We want to stay composed. But if we can get our mind into LSAT taking mode before walking into the test center, I think that's a fantastic strategy, right? So definitely something to keep in mind as you guys look forward to the September exam. All right, moving along. Judy, do you have any tips for speeding up on the reading comp? This is the one section I struggle with the most. So, great question, Judy. And I think this is something that comes up all the time, and it actually was an issue for me. Reading comp was my worst section. As I've said, anybody who's paid any attention to me, whether it's in the previous Q&As or you have a free LSAT Max account, I didn't read for my major. I was business economics at UCLA for undergrad, and so my reading comprehension skills left a lot to be desired. But as I was preparing for the LSAT, I fell into the trap that I feel most students fall into, because as you compare reading comp to logical games and logical reasoning, the strategies are, there's far fewer strategies and things that you need to be applying on reading comp than there are for logic games and logical reasoning, which resulted in me putting reading comp on the back burner. And I remember leading up to my LSAT, I took a practice LSAT and I scored a 169, but I missed 10 questions on reading comp because I had ignored it. And obviously that was a great awakening for me. And it caused me to really start paying more attention to reading comp. And I started to practice reading comp consistently, right? I would try to do, 3 to 4 full length reading comp sections per week under the time pressure. And by starting to practice it consistently, I really fell into a groove, right? I think, the things that are issues for students on reading comp is understanding that you're not reading the passage to memorize. If they ask you anything super specific, they used to give you line references. Today's world is even better. They're just going to highlight the passage for you. So you can always jump back if it's something super specific. I think the key as you go through the passage in terms of reading comp is, understanding the author's main point, right? Why was it written? How does the author proceed? What is the structure of the author's argument, right? And the other thing we highlight is anytime the author makes any distinctions, whether similarities or differences between people, groups, movements, you definitely want to note those because the likelihood of those being tested in the questions that follow is very high. So definitely I would recommend continue to practice reading comprehension under time pressure. Obviously, we offer the Economist with our premium course, but you don't need to sign up for LSATMax to take advantage of the Economist. It's a $12 subscription. We find it to be extremely useful in terms of training your mind to pay attention when you read well-written, dense articles with high level of vocabulary about subjects that you have zero interest in, right? And you notice the LSAT has a remarkable ability to pick those passages that most students aren't interested in, right? Because I think that's what they're testing. Because as you can imagine, when you get to law school, you're going to encounter a ton of reading that you might not necessarily find to be the most fascinating stuff, right? And obviously being able to pay attention and understand that is important. So I hope that's helpful. And again, just to finish my story, by focusing on reading comprehension, on my actual LSAT, I missed 3 questions on reading comp, which I hope that gives you the sense of going from missing 10 plus to missing 3. It is also something that you can improve on. Just make sure that you spend the time to do that. All right, so let's see what other questions we have here. All right, so from Keon, how do I get better at weekend questions in LR? I've been practicing with no luck. Okay, so weakening questions. So again, I think in general, as you talk about, weakening questions, any question that's really an argument, right? I think it's coming back to the same thing, which is the first and most important part of your success is understanding the argument, right? And I can give you an example, actually, a personal example. If you go look at the December 2004 LSAT, which was my LSAT, there was a question on it about some kind of, I think it was a paper manufacturer or something that was releasing some kind of chemical into the water, and it was causing, or the fish were having reproductive abnormalities, and it was a weekend question. And it drove me crazy on my exam. It was one of the questions that I missed. And I went back after, it was a disclosed exam, so I could go back and look at it. And for those of you who have the question about what does disclosed mean, that's all it means, right? Disclosed just means that you can look at the questions after the fact. LSAT's going to release the exam, right? Like they just released the June 2018 exam, which is Prep Test 87. For those of you who are wondering where that is, it will be updated into LSATMax. I promise you it is coming, and we will get it live before September. But when I went back and looked at it without the time pressure, I realized why I got it wrong. It was a cause and effect argument that I completely missed. And the correct answer choice, I believe, was showing effect without cause or cause without effect. One of those, right, that obviously would weaken it. So again, remember, in terms of how do you weaken cause and effect arguments, cause without effect, effect without cause, and then obviously the easiest one is alternative causes. The idea that smoking causes cancer. this person has cancer, right, but they also happen to live next to a nuclear power plant, right, that would be a way to weaken the argument that smoking causes cancer, although, as has been well documented at this point, smoking does cause cancer. So public service announcement there, just in case anyone was confused about that. So I think that's really the way you want to think about weakening questions in any argument, right? So again, focus on the stimulus and understanding the argument, right? Because obviously if you can understand the argument, the likelihood of you finding the correct answer, eliminating irrelevant answer choices is heightened. So that would be my recommendation in terms of improving with weakening questions. And again, if you want to find that old video, it's on YouTube, Struggling with Logical Reasoning. Watch this. I think you'll find that helpful. All right, so let's keep going through these questions. Mike Brooks, what do you make of law schools starting to accept the GRE? Are they weighing it more than the LSAT? Well, so a couple of things. First, only 25% of schools, about 25% of law schools accept the GRE. So unfortunately, the GRE is not an option really, unless you happen to be one of those rare students who's only applying to schools that accept the GRE, right? And that's, again, with only 25% of the schools, it does limit the options. In terms of why they're starting to accept the GRE, I think the issue was, ever since the economy collapsed in 2009, which was when I was in law school, I think this idea that law school, I think that, back in the days, there was a trend where students who didn't know what they wanted to do with their life said, hey, I'm going to go to law school, right? Which was a horrible idea. But obviously with the economy going upside down, a lot of jobs disappearing, I think that really made people start to reconsider that kind of a notion. And so law school applications declined dramatically. They're starting to turn around what they call the Trump bump. So it has changed recently, but I think, one of the reasons you're seeing that law schools starting to accept the GRE is this idea that there's always been this group of students who is considering graduate school in general, right? And one of those graduate school programs being law school. But having this additional requirement of the LSAT, right, would basically take those students out of the law school equation, because going through two graduate school exams is not only time, but it's also money and stress and energy, right? So I think that's the idea of starting to accept the GRE, is trying to get those students who, if they could use the GRE to apply to graduate programs in general, one of which again being law school, they might be able to, increase the applicant pool. But again, it's only 25% of the schools. If you are considering the GRE, make sure you check out GRE Max. We also have an app for that. But yeah, unless that's your situation, we're big believers that the LSAT is the way to go. And another thing I think is interesting is they're testing completely different things, which I'm not, I'm one of the first people to say, there are a lot of issues with standardized exams, but the LSAT, I think, is unique in the fact that preparing for the LSAT, changes the way you think in a way that will be extremely beneficial to you as you go on to law school and eventually become a practicing attorney. So, something to keep in mind, that there are a lot of benefits to preparing for the LSAT from the perspective of your success in law school, and then obviously as you look forward. All right, so we have a question. Uma, is the LSAT and GPA the only requirements for law school? Well, so no, definitely not, right? You have personal statements, you have letters of rec, right? The LSAT is by far the number one factor. They say it's up to 75, 80%. And the reason why they weight it so much more heavily than the GPA is not an apples to apples comparison, right? For example, I was business economics at UCLA. How could you take my GPA and compare it to a student who was double EE with computer science at Georgia Tech, right? It's completely different in terms of what we're comparing, whereas the LSAT is a standardized exam that every student has to take, so they obviously weight it far more heavily. But in addition to that, I think something that's really important that we've obviously discussed on some of the other Q&As is the personal statement, right? If you look at my personal story, I applied to Harvard Law School for 3 consecutive years. The first 2 years I got waitlisted. The third year I was accepted. What was the difference? Because I had the same GPA, the same LSAT. The difference was in year 3, I really spent the time. I took my personal statement seriously. I was able to show, the person behind the numbers in a way that resonated with the admissions committee that was able to get me admission, right? So don't fall into the trap that I fell into, thinking that you have the numbers, you can half-ass the rest of your application, right? You definitely want to spend the time on your personal statement. Is your one chance to show the person behind the numbers. And if you need any help with that, we do offer admission consulting services, right? So definitely reach out. We're happy to chat with you about your law school admissions, and your personal statement in particular. And obviously in terms of letters of rec, I think that's also really important. And one of the questions we get constantly is, should I ask people who don't know me very well, but have, big names, big profiles to write me letters of rec? And I'm a believer that you should not do that. I think, what's most important about your letters of recommendation is not who they're coming from, but how well they know you and how they can speak about you as an applicant, right? And I think obviously, when you request letters of recommendations from, people who know you well, professors who you work closely with, I think it makes a huge difference. All right, moving right along. Advice on speeding up with the logic games, hazmat. Well, again, I think, practice makes perfect. And again, we talked about this at length in our Q&A on logic games. So if you didn't get a chance to watch that, please check that one out. We go over, the pain points in terms of the setup. How do I know I made all the deductions? And again, I think practice makes perfect, right? And the idea being spending the time to review your work so that if you do a game, you have your setup, and then you're checking your setup with our setup or somebody else's setup. How did they arrive at the deduction that you missed, right? Focus on the rule or combination of rules that allowed that to happen. The idea being that, games are really repetitive. I think the games is the easiest section to see how repetitive the LSAT is. The idea being, if you encounter that rule or combination of rules again on a similar game, next time you'll be able to make the deduction. So definitely take advantage. That would be my approach to it. And again, we talk about it in again the Q&A on logic games. Go through every logic game possible, right? Note the ones you can't finish on time, 8 minutes and 45 seconds, or get perfect, right? Circle back, do them again. All right, so what about an English literature major? Should I still get the Economist? Well, I think it depends on how you're doing with reading comp, right? I don't think being an English lit major is going to be determinative. I think if you're feeling good about reading comp, if you're doing well, then why bother, right? If you're not, it's something that I think might be beneficial to you, right? And again, I think another thing to think about, again, as you guys progress towards your target exam is you should come up with a roadmap of how you're going to achieve your target score, right? For myself, my target score was 170. I came up with a plan. Perfect on games, 2 to 3 per logical reasoning section, 3 to 4 on reading comp, for a max wrong of 10, which would put me in a 170 range. And the idea there being, as I took my practice LSATs, for example, when I missed 10 on reading comp, that was a highlight to me that, wow, I have to fix that to have any chance at achieving my target score. And that's what allowed me, or not allowed me, that's what motivated me to turn my attention to that section and get it to where I needed to be. So I would highly recommend starting to think about how you're going to achieve your raw score, which will then obviously convert to the scaled score that you're looking for. Another question here from Cassie. Do you have any outside book recommendations for learning critical thinking? Not for the LSAT. I think, in terms of the LSAT, I would focus on, LSAT prep materials because, critical thinking can be far more complicated. Same thing with formal logic. A lot of students ask that about sufficient and necessary. Formal logic can be a lot more complicated than the formal logic you would encounter on the LSAT. So I would focus on LSAT materials as you prepare for the LSAT. Question here from Jared. How many months should you spend preparing for the LSAT? fantastic question. Again, because something that I've noticed, there seems to be a trend, while, LSATMax is lifetime access, there seems to be a trend of our competitors starting to make access even shorter as opposed to longer, which again, makes no sense to me. And the reason I say that is this idea that you should prepare 8-10 weeks for the LSAT. I want you to think about that, right? You spent 4 years of your life on undergrad, right? At least some people did it in 3, but the majority of people do 4. Some people take 5, right? For some part of your application, the GPA, which is at best 20%, right? And then you're going to spend 8 weeks preparing for the LSAT, which is 75-80% of the application, right? Remember, law school is a huge investment of your time and money, okay? So I'm of the opinion that you should put yourself in a position to make the most of that commitment, right? That sacrifice, the opportunity cost, right? Because remember, you could be doing other things, right? So I think it's really important as you think about preparing for the LSAT, you want to put yourself in a position to score as high as possible, right? And I think a good way to think about it is take a practice LSAT and see where you are. And then think about where you want to go. The farther you are, the longer your prep will generally take you. So you look at my personal experience, I started with the 148. I wanted to break 170. My journey took me 7 months. Now, every student is different. I've seen students do that in 2-3 months. I've seen students take a year and more, right? So I think it's really about where you are and where you want to go. Generally speaking, the larger that spread, the more time it will require in terms of your LSAT prep. Crystal, I feel unmotivated after my score. What's the best way to start studying again? Well, I think the best place to start would be to shoot us a text. Again, 310-818-7743. And let's talk about your specific situation in more detail, right? How did you prepare? I know a lot of students, it's not that they don't put in the time. They're putting in the time, but unfortunately they're relying on resources that might not be the best in terms of helping you break through. And so I think it's important to really focus on, what you used to prepare, how beneficial it was. And again, going back to what we said earlier, doing the same thing and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. A question here in terms of what section should you study first? I don't think that matters. If you look at how LSATMax's course is laid out, we actually introduce all of the sections. It's not like we do one, then move to another, then move to another. As you go through the course calendar, you do a little bit of both. I think, it's important to understand certain concepts, right? You definitely want to do before you expose yourself to other concepts. Like, you definitely want to have experience sufficient and necessary before you encounter group games or strengthen questions, right? Because of the prevalence of the concept of sufficient and necessary on those question types. If you haven't seen sufficient and necessary yet, those other concepts aren't going to make a whole lot of sense, right? So I think that's a really important way to think about your LSAT prep. Sorry. All right, guys, let's see how many more we can get through here. I appreciate it, guys. I'm glad everyone's enjoying my t-shirt. I don't remember where I got it, but I'll try to find it. If you guys look, you can see the bottom of it is actually Kanye's body, Pablo's top. Chris Ford, what are the first steps for getting ready for the LSAT? Well, I think the best place to start is taking a practice LSAT under time pressure, because that's going to give you a gauge of where you are. Because, I think obviously if you take it and you do well, great, right? Maybe you don't need to spend any time studying. And by do well, I mean you achieve your target score. Right? Some people are naturals, right? It's rare, but some people are naturals. So I think it's really important to start with a practice LSAT and then go from there. And again, as we talk about this, in terms of, we talked about our digital LSAT simulator, but beyond that, LSATMax, if you haven't created a free account, I would highly recommend doing that, because in addition to a free digital LSAT, which you can definitely take, and this is what the LSATMax looks like when you create a free account, as you can see here. The first 5 lessons of our course are also unlocked for free, right? And so that is a great place to start in terms of starting to learn a little about the LSAT without having to spend any money, right? Gerard, do you think it's possible to increase your score 2-3 points with only a month of studying? Absolutely. I think 2-3 points in a month is completely realistic. So I think, you should definitely feel confident that you can move it that much. We've actually seen students move it, 5+ points in a month. Every student is different. I think it also depends on where you are on the scale, right? The lower you are, the easier it is to improve. Obviously, as you move up the scale, your margin of error changes a great deal. And that obviously will make moving more challenging. So I think it also is relevant to where you are in the process. Josh, so you recommend that when we're about a month away from taking the exam, that's when we should start taking, I'm assuming, simulated LSATs? Absolutely not. You should start that way in advance. It's one of the reasons we stress starting sooner rather than later, right? The first step of LSAT prep is understanding what you're doing. That's really the value of a course, whether it's LSATMax, whether it's somebody else. You want to have that foundation in place so that you can then, turn your attention to the timed practice, right? That's the second step of the process, and that's the idea of these 8-10 week courses that cut off your access. It makes no sense, right? You look at my personal story, I signed up for a $1,500 10-week course. By the time that course finished, I had improved, right? I had gone from the 140s. I want to say I, was in the high 150s, but nowhere near my target score. And, so what I ended up doing is I ended up, postponing my LSAT, and I continued to prepare. And it was that second part of the process where I was doing the time pressure practice, simulated LSATs that I was really able to break through. So I would say the sooner that you can turn your attention to that phase, the more likely it is that you will be able to achieve your target score at that time. So again, it's a question we get all the time. Foreign students, obviously, with English being your second language, it's a little bit more challenging to prepare, particularly given, not only are you going to be going, dealing with this, the subject matter, or it's not subject matter, the concepts, right? The critical thought that the LSAT is testing, but you're also going to be able, you're also going to be dealing with the fact that English is not your first language. So, all I would say is, all that does is it makes it a little bit more challenging, but it's definitely still doable. English is also my second language, obviously not to the extent of someone who is a more recent immigrant, but I definitely experienced that as well, not to the extent that I think some other students experience it. But I would definitely keep that in mind. There's nothing stopping you from doing well in the LSAT because you are not American born and English is not your first language, right? It will definitely be a little bit more challenging. But again, the LSAT is challenging for everybody, so don't feel discouraged about that. So as we wind down here, a couple things again I just wanted to emphasize for everybody. Again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Obviously, if you have an LSATMax account, you can email us, chat with us. You can obviously text my cell phone because everyone who creates a free account has my cell phone number. I'm not going to give it out here because I want you to create a free account. Now, that being said, you can definitely text LSAT to 310-818-7743. And then the other thing I would say is, again, if you're looking for a digital LSAT simulator, right, don't forget you can access our Practice LSATs app on iPad as well as on Google Play, and we do have the bundles available as well that we did highlight for you guys here, where you can get bundles of prep tests instead of having to buy them each individually a la carte. And then lastly, the private tutoring, I think, is also a great thing. And the final question we had here from Brown Nose Girl, Dad, when do I get to make my Instagram debut? Let's see. And as you guys deal with stress and anxiety, introducing the one and only Maybe Baby. So I appreciate everyone coming out to join us. It was a pleasure as always, and we will be back very soon for another Instagram Live. Keep up the hard work, guys. Hard work pays, and don't settle. All right. See you guys soon.